So this expense tracker has taken some shape, and it's basically finished from the core functionality, at least. We got all the core features implemented. We can add expenses, we can filter our expenses. But if you remember the original state, which I showed you a couple of hours ago, then there is one crucial element and feature which is missing: the chart, where we can actually see a graphical representation of our expenses per month. And that is therefore what we're now going to dive into to then conclude this module and this first course project. Now, for this chart, I will start by adding a new components folder, which I'll name chart because it will hold all the components that are related to the chart. And I will split up the chart into two main components. For one, that's the chart itself, the chart component, which we can add to our application. But then inside of the chart, we have all these bars, and I will actually create a separate component for those, the chart bar component. So we'll have these two components, and we're also going to have some styles. So I'll already add a chart CSS and a chart bar.css file, and you find these two files attached. So as always, you can copy and paste the styles you find in there, or simply use these attached CSS files right away. And then let's start with the chart.js file, with the chart itself. There, I will import React from React, even though that's technically not required in this setup, but still. And then I'll create my chart functional component here, like this. So this component function, I should say, and export this like that. And now with that, in the chart, we of course want to render all these chart bars. And the question is now how we want to do that, how we want to structure the JSX code in this component, and how that all should work. Well, eventually we're going to import the chart bar component. At the moment it's of course empty, but we're soon going to add something there, and hence I can already add this import. And I then want to in the end return some JSX code where we have all these chart bars. So maybe we first of all set up a div with a class name of chart to apply that styling. And for that, we then also import chart CSS like this. Not chart bar, but chart CSS to apply the styles. But inside of the div, we now want to have the bars. And we could simply render 12 individual chart bars for the 12 months which we have. But I will actually create a bit of a more flexible chart, which is actually not necessarily restricted to months and to 12 data points. Instead, we could say that when the chart component is being used somewhere in our application, we want to receive the data points that should be plotted as props, so that the chart component is fairly configurable, and the components that use the chart component can decide how many data points with which values should be rendered. And therefore, I actually will output the chart bars dynamically by going through an array of data points and mapping every data point to a chart bar. And that's of course basically what we already learned in this module, how we output lists of content dynamically. And that's also why I'm doing it here, so that we again practice this. So on props, we could expect a data points prop. Of course, that name is up to you since it's your component, but I expect the data points prop, and I expect that to hold a value which is an array. Hence, we can call map on that, and then we map every single data point into a chart bar component, so that we create as many chart bar components as we have data points. And then, of course, we want to pass some data into the chart bar to control how it will be rendered, so which value will be rendered there. And for that, we of course want to extract some data from the incoming data points. Now, up to this point, we're never using the chart component, so we as the creator of this component can define which kind of data we expect to extract there in the future. And for example, we could say that the chart bar component should receive a value prop, and there we want to pass data point.value. Of course, that will require that in the chart bar, we then read this prop, and that when we define the data points later, that every data point has a value property. So that a data point is an object which has a value property. That's what we're basically defining now, since that is how we want to use that chart component and the chart bar component in there. Now, I also want to make sure that every chart bar plots the value in relation to the maximum value in the entire chart. And therefore, I also want to pass in a max value property, and that is currently null, let's say. That's not data which we extract from the data point, because that is a unique value which is the same for all chart bars in a given chart. So we will need to derive this max value, and we'll do this in a second. For the moment, I'll set this to null, but that's just a temporary value. We probably also want to have a label though. For example, in this case, to have a label of January, February, March, April, and so on. And therefore, I'll add a label prop and pass in data point.label, like that. And since we're mapping this, since we're outputting a list here, we also should add a key, because you learned that this special key prop helps React render these list items efficiently. And therefore, I do expect that every data point also has a unique ID. Or maybe we actually use the label, so that we say that the label should be unique. Every chart bar has its own unique label, and therefore we can also use the label as a unique identifier for this special key prop here. That looks good to me. Now, of course, we want to continue working on the chart bar to bring that to life.